The bottom of Daf Samach Beis, Amud Beis, 4 lines from the bottom. This goes back to our halacha that we learned in the Mishnah regarding shechting the korban Pesach and having a machshava that included both mulim and arelim. It said in the Mishnah that if you have in mind that you're shechting it for people that had a bris, people that are arelim, so then it's going to be kosher. So the Braisa here brings that there is a difference in exactly how your kavanah was. Tanya, we learned in the Braisa, Acherim oimrim. Acherim said, Acherim is Rab Meir. Hiktim mulim la arelim. If in your machshava you first intended to shecht it for people that are mulim, with a bris, and then afterwards arelim. In that case, kosher. Arelim lemulim. If the first thing you had in mind was it's for arelim, and afterwards you thought it's for mulim, then posel. So there's a difference what you had in mind first and what second. Fragt the Gemara, Ma'ishna mulim la arelim de kosher. What's the reason? If you first had in mind for mulim and then for arelim, it's going to be kosher. The kula arla be'inon veleke. As we said before, the only time if you have in mind you shechting it for arelim, it's going to be posel, is if it's all arelim. If the entire group is arelim, then it's going to be posel. But as long as there's someone in it that could use it, it's going to be kosher. So that's why in that case it's kosher. If so, arelim lemulim nami, even if you first thought for arelim, but there's also mulim that you thought for as well. So kula arla bin veleke. The only time would be posel if it's all arla, but it isn't. So what difference does it make what you thought of first and what you thought of second? That's basically the Gemara's question. We're going to see soon in the continuation of the Gemara that this is the opinion of Rab Meir, which is Acherim, but the Rabbanon disagree with this and hold that it makes no difference what you thought first, what you thought second. But first the Gemara is going to bring a few pshatim in explaining Rab Meir's opinion here. So Leime, should we say, Kasavri Acherim hold, Eino l'shchita elo basayf, that the shchita of a carbon only takes effect at the last moment of the shchita. In other words, there's a machlokes about this between Rava and Abaya, as Rashi quotes here, very barichis, and we'll see in the continuation of the Gemara a little bit of it. When it comes to shchita, shchita is a process that takes a minute or two, or whatever, not a minute, but it is a process. You have to cut the two pipes of the animal, so let's say it takes, 20 seconds, whatever it is. So the question is the entire Maisa HaShchita from the beginning till the end all part of the Avodah of the Shchita of the carbon? Every part of it is a chelik of that Avodah? Or no, the whole process is just sort of like a preparation for the last moment when you complete it. When you complete the Shchita, that's the moment when the Shchita is done. So now, the relevance of this question is when you get to the machshava that you have during Shchita. At what part of the Shchita is the machshava that you're having significant? Is it from the first moment to the end, the entire duration, the entire process of the Shchita, or only the very last moment of the Shchita? If we're going to say that it's only the very last moment of the Shchita, it's a second. It's not really possible to have two different machshavas. So if he thought for mulim first, so at that second he thought, I'm shechting it for people that have a bris. When he thought for arelim was already after the fact. On the reverse, if he thought for arelim at that second of the shchita, the last second of the shchita, and afterwards he thought for mulin, so then he thought for arelim at the second of the shchita, and then the machshava of arelim of mulin was already after the fact. That's how the Gemara now wants to explain this word over here that Acherim said, this distinction here. So again, leime kasavri Acherim, should we say that Acherim hold eino l'shchita elo basayf, that the second of shchita is the very last second, and only then is the machshava of the person significant. Ukedirave, and this follows the opinion of Rava that said so. The Omar Rava said, Adayin hi machlokes. It's still a machlokes. Now, what exactly Adayin hi machlokes means is a very, very extensive arichas thing. As you see here, an extremely long Rashi. This goes into two different arguments between Rabbi Yosi and Rab Meir, and then Rab Meir and Rab Yehuda. A big discussion here in Rashi, which is beyond the scope of this shir to go into this. But the point is that Rava, regarding a different subject, said this idea, that the shchita is only the last second. So hilkoch, so therefore it would come out as follows. Hiktim mulim la arelim, if the first machshava he had is that it's for mulim, and afterwards he thinks for arelim, so mulim chayli, that machshava that he had at the last second of the shchita for mulin, that took effect. That's the machshava that's significant. Arelim loy chayli. The machshava for arelim is already after the fact, so that doesn't have any effect at all. So it's going to be kosher. Hiktem arelim lemulin. But in the reverse, if at the last moment of the shchita he's thinking that the shchita is for the arelim, so areilim chayli. So then the machshava for areilim that takes effect. Mulin lechayli. The machshava that he has for mulin was already after the fact, and that does not take effect. That would be a pshat for explaining this distinction here. But Rabbe says, Loi, I can give you a different pshat. Lo'olam kesavri acherim yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'atzaif. I can even say that acherim, Rab Meir holds that the shchita is the entire process of the shchita, from the beginning until the end. So there theoretically would be enough time to have two machshavas during that shchita. But what's the reason why, if you first think for areilim and then you think for mulim, that it's not going to be good? What we're talking about over here is kagon shegomar beliboy letarvayu. In his heart, he was thinking that he's going to shecht for both of them. Bein l'mulin and bein la'areilim. For mulin and areilim. That's what he had in mind. But for hoitzi bepiv la'areilim, when he only actually verbalized, he said, I'm shechting it for areilim. V'loy hispik loy ma'lemulin. He didn't get a chance to verbally say that I'm also shechting it for mulin. At shenigmira shchita ba'areilim. Until the shchita was done, and he only verbally said that he's shechting it for areilim. So what the Gemara is saying is he had one thing in his heart, and another thing verbally that he said. What you see from this Gemara is, both Rashi and Tosfos point this out, a very fundamental thing when it comes to the machshava by kachim. We keep on talking about the machshava, the right machshava, the wrong machshava. What you see right here in this Gemara is the whole idea of machshava by kachim, when it makes it possible, is only if you verbally say it. If it has to be bepeh. Rashi over here in the end of the Bramaschel v'hocha b'mayaskinon says, Kol machshava de kachim moitzi bepiv hu. Anytime you talk about machshava by kachim, it's when he verbalizes it. If a person has the wrong machshava, but he doesn't verbalize it, that wrong machshava doesn't have any effect.
What happened if he mentioned before he started the shchita?
So then it's not relevant. It's not at the time of the shchita. It has to be during the avodah, during the avodah of the carbon. So over here, what happened is, in his heart, he had one machshava. He was thinking, I'm shechning it for mulim and areilim. Then when it came to the actual shchita, so on his mouth, he said that it's going to be for areilim, but he didn't get a chance to say that it's going to be for mulin as well. So the question is, what happens now with this kind of a shchita, with this, when you verbalize it this way? Ubaha pligi. So here the argument is as follows. As I mentioned, what was said before was only acherim, which is Rab Meir, but the Rabbanon disagree with this. So the argument is as follows. Rab Meir's opinion is, Loi bi'inon piv v'liboy shavim. When it comes to something that you verbalize by the carbon, so even if in your heart you were thinking something else, it doesn't matter. In your heart you were thinking a machshava that would be kosher, because you were thinking it's going to be for mulim and areilim. But then, b'payil, you verbally said only areilim, so it's going to be pasul. So that's why Rab Meir said that if you only got a chance to say areilim at the time of the shchita, and then mulim later, too late, so then it's going to be pasul. Rabbanon's opinion is bi'inon piv v'liboy shavim. Anything you verbally say, which makes the carbon kosher or pasul, it has to be based on what's going on in your heart. It has to be the same in what you're thinking and the same what you're saying. If he was thinking that he wants to shecht it for mulim and areilim, but b'payil, out of his mouth, he only said areilim, so since what he said was taka pasul, but it's not the same of what he was thinking. What he's thinking is good. He was thinking it's mulim and areilim. So therefore what he said will not pasul the carbon. That's the opinion of Rabbanon, so therefore according to them this distinction won't matter. I'm saying over here the pshat in the Gemara according to Rashi and the Rambam, Rashi and Tosfos, as I said, that by kachim, every machshava has to come out bepeh in order to have an effect. The Rambam holds that there's no raya from this Gemara. The Rambam holds, when I get to all kachim, that it's only machshava. There's no peh. You don't have to say anything verbally. In our Gemara it's pretty clear. We're talking about peh and leiv. So the Mefarshim explain, according to the Rambam, if a person, when he has his machshava, is thinking to himself, I'm going to say so and so, so then only if he says it does it have an effect. But if you just think of machshava, I'm shechting it for this purpose, and you're not thinking that you're going to say it, so then the machshava alone has an effect. Here we're talking about where the person thought, I'm going to say so and so. So then what you say matters, then we look at machlokes over here, whether it matches up to what you're thinking in your heart. This is a fundamental machlokes when we get to all kachim, whether it has to be dafke b'dibur or even b'machshava.
So piv v'liboy shavi means even if he doesn't say it, it's okay. If he's
correct. If he doesn't say anything,
because he can say also the opposite. He can say piv v'liboy shavi. He has to say.
According to Rashi and Tosfos, if the person did not say anything, so then the carbon doesn't the stoma is lishma. I mean, the carbon doesn't get affected by if he didn't say the wrong thing. Sagt the Gemara weiter. The Gemara asks on this pshat, the Ksavar Rab Meir. Does Rab Meir hold loy beinon piveli by shaven, that it's not necessary for a person to what he says verbally and what he's thinking in his heart to be equal in order for what he says to have an effect? But I'll ask you a question on this. Rab Meir himself in another place says differently. There's a Stam Mishnah, which is usually Rab Meir, and it says in the Mishnah as follows: HaMeskaven loy matruma. Person had the intent regarding produce to say this will be truma, and v'yama ma'isa. Mistakenly, he verbally said it's going to be ma'isa, or the reverse, ma'isa v'ama truma. Oi, regarding another case, regarding just a neder that a person would make, she'eni nichnas l'bayizeh. He intended to say, I make a neder, I will not enter into this house. And mistakenly he said, a different house. Sheni nene lezeh, I will not have any hana, any benefit of this individual. And mistakenly he said from another person. Loi oma klum, what he said is worthless, achiyu piv v'li shaven, unless what he says and what he's thinking are the same. In order for your words to have an effect, it has to be in sync with what you have in your heart. So we clearly see over here Stam Mishnah, which is Rab Meir, that says piv v'li shaven, otherwise it has no effect. So we can't say the pshat over here is that in his heart he's thinking that he's shechting for mulim and areilim, and only because he said in his mouth, with his mouth, areilim, it's going to be possible. It's not piv v'li shaven. So therefore this is the question on this pshat of Rabbah. Elom Abaye says Abaye as follows, another pshat. And this is Abaye following his opinion, going back to the subject of shchita. Abaye says that the shchita is the entire duration of the shchita. From mitchila at seif, the whole process of the shchita is all part of the avodah of the shchita. And therefore Abaye explains as follows. Reisha, in the first case, the Omar Simin Rishain Lemulin. So there's two simonim. There's the windpipe and the food pipe that you're shechting from the animal. When he shechted the first pipe of the animal, Lemulin, his machshava, or he verbally said that it's going to be for people that have a bris. Simin Sheni, then when he shechted the second simin, Afla Areilim. So he said, I'm also shechting it for Areilim as well. So what happens? How is he keeping in mind?
It's a half a second.
It's a little bit more than a half a second, and this is what happened. One siman and another siman. The besimin sheni. So what that means, what happened over here is, when he was shechting the second siman, nami pesichi bei mulin. What's mixed into his thought, or what he's saying, is also mulin. The first siman, he said, I'm shechting it only for mulin. But then the second one, he said, afla areilim, meaning mulin as well. Okay, so therefore it comes out that the first and second siman have mulin that he's shechting it for. So it's going to be kosher. Seife, in the second case, the Oma siman rishayin la areilim. The first siman, he says, he's shechting it only for areilim. Siman sheni lemulim. And then when it comes to the second siman, he says he's shechting it for mulim. Or maybe for also mulin. Or for only mulin, either way. So the besimin rishayin, the first siman of the animal that he shechted, haloi pesichi bei mulin. He didn't shecht for any mulin, it was only for areilim. So one part of the shechita, half of the shechita, was being done only for the areilim. So Rab Meir will hold that's a problem. So the Gemara now is going to explain, basically what happened over here is, half of the shechita was done with a wrong kavanah. The second half of the shechita was done okay. The first half of the shechita was done with a wrong kavanah. The question is, if you have a wrong machshava for half of an avodah, for half of a shechita, is that a problem? And that's here the machlokes between Rab Meir and the Rabbanan. But Rab Meir follows his opinion in other places. The Omar, he said, mefaglin b'chatzi mater. You can have a machshava of pigul, which is the machshava that you're going to eat it out of its right time. That's also another example of a not good machshava. Even if you have that machshava only for a chatzi mater, which means for a half a aveda, a half a thing that causes the animal to be permitted to eat or to bring it on the mizbeach, that's what's called a mater. So mefaglin b'chatzi mater, even if you had a wrong machshava just by half of the aveda, it makes it pigul. So the same thing over here. You had the wrong machshava for just one half of the shechita, the first siman, it makes it puzzle. But Rabbana l'tamayu, the Rabbana disagree with this. The Amri, they say, ein mefaglam b'chatzi mater. You don't make something pigul if you had the wrong machshava just by half of the aveda. So since only the first siman you were thinking for areilim, and the second one you were thinking for mulin, so it's not enough to make the carbon puzzle. That's why they would hold either way would be fine. Zok the Mishnah. Now we go to another halacha regarding Korban Pesach, which is a basic thing that the pasuk says. We learned about this in the first Perek. Leisishchat al chometz dam sifchi. You're not allowed to shecht a Korban Pesach while you have chometz. So the Gemara is going to do Mishnah here, and the Gemara will discuss exactly who's the one that has the chometz. When are you over this? Let's see the details here. Hasheichet es Pesach. You shecht the Korban Pesach ala chometz, and you have chometz. Over beloisese. You over on the loisese of leisishchat al chometz dam sifchi. Rabbi Yehuda says this iser that it says in the Torah regarding Korban Pesach, we learn out, the Gemara will bring the halacha, that af hatomid. This applies also when you shech the tomid shel bein arbayim on Erev Pesach, and you still have chametz in your possession, you're going to be over on this lav as well. Rab Shimon says as follows. It depends if it's on Erev Pesach. Rab Shimon also holds of this idea that this iser applies not only to the Korban Pesach, but it applies to other Korbanos as well, but it depends when. Rab Shimon says as follows. Ha-Pesach, when it comes to the Korban Pesach, Ba'arba Asar, you shechted it in its time on Erev Pesach. L'shma chayiv, if you shechted the Korban Pesach l'shma, so it's a kosher carbon, it's a good shechita, and you shechted it while you have chametz, so then you're going to be chayiv for this lav, because it was a good shechita and you had chametz. But if you shechted your Korban Pesach shaloi l'shma, which then the halacha is that the Korban Pesach is pasul, so then pater. You're going to be pater of this lav of having chametz in your possession, because the lav is only if it was a good shechita. If it's not a good shechita, if it's pasul, so then you'll be pater. The shar kol hazvachim, any other karbanis that you would bring on Erev Pesach after chatzos. So now what's going to be the halacha if you shecht any of them while you have chametz? Bein lishman or bein shaloi lishman, whether they were shechted lishma, whether they were shechted shaloi lishma, potter. Either way, you're going to be potter. What Rab Shimon is saying here is on Erev Pesach, the only carbon that this iser, this lav of l'sishchat al chametz dam zivchi applies to is the Korban Pesach, not to any other carbon. So on Erev Pesach, any other carbon, you're going to be potter. But now Rab Shimon holds that this iser extends not only on Erev Pesach, it extends also to Pesach itself. Also on Pesach. It starts from Erev Pesach, but it also extends to Pesach itself. But on Pesach itself, the halacha is going to be different. U'b'mayed, on Pesach itself. So now, starting with the Korban Pesach. L'shmoi potter. If you shechted the Korban Pesach, l'shem Korban Pesach on Pesach, you're going to be potter. Because shechting a Korban Pesach out of its time, l'shem Pesach, is not kosher at all. So therefore you'll be potter for shechting it on chametz, because the carbon is not a kosher shechita. Shaloi l'shma, if you shecht a Korban Pesach in the middle of Pesach, shaloi l'shma, so then chayiv, you're going to be chayiv. Why is that? Because we learned before, what happens with a Korban Pesach if you shecht it on any other day? It's a shlomim. So this is a Korban shlomim that he's shechting not for Korban Pesach, but for Korban shlomim. And what Rab Shimon is saying over here is any carbon you shech during Pesach and you have chametz in your possession, you're going to be over on the lav of l'sishchat al chametz dam zivchi. Rashi points out over here the obvious thing. Of course, this is besides being over on Bal Yirah, Bal Yamatzah. You have chametz in your possession on Pesach, you're over on that lav. But besides that, you're shechting a carbon and you still have chametz, you're also going to be over on the lav of l'sishchat al chametz dam zivchi. V'shar kol hazvachim, all other karbanis on Pesach, so Rab Shimon holds that on Pesach, this lav applies to all other karbanis as well. So all other karbanis, bein lishman, whether they were shechted lishma, bein shaloi lishman, even if they were shechted shaloi lishma, chayiv, you're going to be chayiv for this lav. And the reason is, I mentioned this, it says in the beginning of the Masechta of Zvachim, the rule by all karbanis is, even if you shechted shaloi lishma, the carbon is kosher. The only thing that happens when you shecht any carbon shaloi lishma is that the bailim, the owner that was obligated to bring the carbon, were not yotze their chiyuv, they have to bring the carbon again. But the actual carbon itself is kosher. There's only two exceptions to that. Pesach and Chatos. A Korban Pesach that you shecht shaloi lishma is pasul, and Chatos as well if you shecht shaloi lishma is pasul. So therefore he says all karbanis, whether you shechted it lishma, whether you shechted shaloi lishma, you'll be chayiv because the carbon is kosher. Chutz min Chatos sheshachted shaloi lishma. Besides the Korban Chatos, if you shechted shaloi lishma, so then you won't be over on the lav because as I said, Chatos, if it's done shaloi lishma, it's pasul. Zok the Gemara. Now the Gemara will begin the discussion. Who is the one that has the chametz in the possession? Amar Rab Shimon ben Lakish, lo'ele min chayev. You're not going to be chayev in this lav of leisishchat al chametz dam zivchi. Achi heya chametz l'shaychit oil zaydik. Either the shaychit himself has the chametz, Or the Zaydik, the one that's sprinkling the blood on the Mizbeach has the chametz, even though in the pasuk it says Leisishchat, but the Gemara learns out that it refers also to the Zrike. So the Zaydik has the chametz. Oila echad mibnei chabura, or someone from the group that you're shechting for has this chametz. The ad sheyehei imay bazara. Now Rab Shimon ben Lakish says you only over on the slav, not if you have chametz in your house. You have to have the chametz with you in the azara. Then you're going to be over on the Leishtishchat HaChametz Dam Zivchi. Rabbi Yochanan argues on this last point. Afal pi she'eni mibazara. If you have chametz in your possession, not in the azara, you have it in your house. So if the shaychit or the zaydik or one of the bnei chabura has the chametz in his house, you're going to be over on the slav. What's the basis of the machlokes of Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan? So the Gemara here is going to say a few pshatim. So the first pshat is, if you're going to say their argument is as follows. Be'al besamoch kamiflagi. When the Torah uses the term al, does that mean that it has to be nearby? What does the Torah say here? Le'schishchat al chametz dam zivchi. What does al chametz mean? On chametz. Does that mean it has to be right here in the azara, or even further away, even in your house? And that would be the argument here. Rab Shimon ben Lakish savar al besamoch. The word al means only if it's nearby, which means in the azara. But Rabbi Yochanan savar loy beinon al besamoch. Al is not if it's necessarily nearby, even if it's in your house. That would be the simple pshat of their machlokes here. So the Gemara asks on this, but this exact argument they argued about once before regarding another case where the Torah writes the term al as well. They had the exact same machlokes. So why do they have to argue here again? What's that other case? The Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah regarding the carbon taida. Hashoichet taida lefnim. You shechted the carbon taida inside the azara. The lachma, the bread for the carbon taida. So the carbon taida has the animal that's brought as a carbon, and there's also the breads that are brought with the carbon. What happens with these breads are that you makdish the breads for the carbon, and those breads have a kedushas mammon. They're sort of partially hektish, that the value of these breads become hektish. But then, the moment you shech the carbon, the breads become kadosh kedushas haguf. The breads become like a carbon itself, that the very bread itself becomes kadosh. So the effect of the kedusha of the bread, when does the bread become kadosh? Through the shchita. But the Torah, the lashon in the pasuk is, you have it over here on the side of this Gemara in Ois Beis, the pasuk says that al chalais lechem chometz yakriv karbonai al zevach toidas shlomov. The Torah also uses the term al, that the shchita of the Torah should be al lechem chom, al zevach toidas shlomov. So the question is, when you're shechting your Torah and you want the effect of shechting the carbon to affect the bread, the lechem, that it should become kadosh, where does the bread have to be? So what happens if you shechted the carbon Torah lefnim, v'lachma chutz l'chayma, and the breads for this carbon were outside of the wall? So then, loy kiddush halechem. The bread does not get the effect, it does not become kedushas haguf through shechting the carbon. That's what it says in the Mishnah. So now the question is, where outside were the breads? How far? How far away were they? My chutz l'chayma. What does it mean that it was outside the wall? Rabbi Yochanan says chutz l'chaymas beis pagi. Outside of the wall of beis pagi. Beis pagi was a little area that was right at the edge of Yerushalayim. So basically what he's saying is that the bread will not get affected by the carbon. It won't get the kedusha from the carbon only if it's outside Yerushalayim, outside the area where you're allowed to eat a carbon taida. If it's that far, then it won't get affected. Even if it's outside of the azara, kaddish, it'll get its kedusha through the shchita of the taida. It does not have to be inside the azara, right there near the carbon. That's Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. Rab Shimon ben Lakish even if the bread was just right outside the azara, loy kaddish, the bread will not get its kedusha through the shchita of the taida. Alma be'inon al besamach. So I see that you have to have al that has to be right nearby in the azara. So they argued about the exact same point. When the taida says al, does it have to be nearby, or it could be further away? So why are they arguing over here in the same machlokes regarding the isser of leisishchat al chametz dam zivchi? So the Gemara suggests now another pshat. Elo rather ba'asra sofik kamifligi. What they're arguing about over here is Ba'asra Safik. What's the machlokes about Asra Safik? So the lav is not to have chametz in your possession while you shech the carbon. So what Reb Shimon ben Lakish is saying is it has to be with you in the azara, because when you give the asra, only if the chametz is in the azara do you know for sure that the guy actually has chametz. But if you're giving the asra and the guy has chametz in his house, so you don't know if he has chametz b'chlal. You don't see if he has chametz. You're giving the asra, but it's a suffix if he has chametz b'chlal. So therefore the asra will not take effect. How can you give him malchus? You only give malchus if there's a warning. Mashenken Rabbi Yechanan says, no, hasra suffix is a valid hasra, even though it was a hasra that was doubtful whether he's going to be over the isra or not, but nevertheless, the hasra takes effect. So even though the chametz is in his house, it takes effect. Taisus over here adds to this pshat that I just said, that Rashi says that it's not only that we don't know if he has chametz in his house, but the person that you're giving hasra to for shechting the carbon while he has chametz could also argue and say, I wasn't sure if there was still chametz in my house. When I left my house, there was chametz there, but I was expecting that chametz that I left there, someone took out, or a dog ate it, or it was gone. I didn't think I actually had chametz. So the person himself could actually say that I didn't even know if I have chametz. Mashen Kirish Lakish says, no, if it turns out that you had chametz, then the hasra is a valid hasra, and therefore you're going to be chayiv malchus. That's what they're arguing about. The subject of hasra is suffix.
Who's giving you hasra?
Whoever it is, so it's the Adam there that see that he's doing this isser, they give him the asra, and then they have to come to Bezin, and he gets malchus. So,
Every person brings a carbon against the hasra?
No. If someone knows that he has chametz and he's giving him asra, don't shech the carbon. You know you have chametz, don't shech the carbon. So the question is, do the people giving asra have to see that he has the chametz, or even if he has the chametz in his house? That's the basis of the machlokes.
Decided is chayiv. The carbon is not kosher, or
The what? I don't think so. I think the carbon will be kosher. It's just that he's over on a lav. So the Gemara, but if that's the machlokes, this argument regarding Asra Safik, they clearly argued about this in a different case. The Itmer, we learned in the following argument of Rabbi Yechon Rish Lakish. Shvua shaycha kikazu hayayim, a person makes a shvua, I'm going to eat this bread today. V'avar hayayim, and the day passes, v'lo yachla. And he didn't fulfill his shvua, he didn't eat the bread. So when do you give this guy the warning? You give this guy the warning in the beginning of the day, you made a shvua, make sure that you eat this bread today, so you don't know if he's going to actually, what's going to happen later in the day. So Rabbi Yechanan ben Shimon ben Lakish, the Amri Tarvayu, Rabbi Yechanan and Rish Lakish both say, Ein loike, you don't get malchus, but for different reasons. Rabbi Yechanan Amein loike, Rabbi Yechanan says you don't get malchus. This is a lav where there's no action that he did to be over this lav. He just didn't eat anything. So if there's no action, there's no malchus. Aval hasra suffix shmo asra. The fact that this is a warning which is with a suffix, that doesn't matter. It's a good asra. In other words, they gave him the asra in the beginning of the day. 5 hours later in the day, the person could say, I forgot about the asra. I didn't remember. I didn't realize. But Rabbi Yechanan holds that's not an issue. Hasra suffix is asra. Reb Shimon ben Lakish Amar, Reb Shimon ben Lakish says, Ein loike mishum dahavale asra suffix. You don't get malchus because it's asra suffix. Asra suffix lo yishma asra. A hasra over here, it's a suffix, and the rest of the day, if he remembers or not, it's not a hasra. Avolav she'ein be ma'aseh loiken olav. A shlokich holds a lav, even if it has no ma'aseh, you still get malchus. So what do you see? This machlekes regarding hasra suffix, they argued about this in another place. So why do they have to argue about this again? So Amri, the answer was given as follows. We go back to the previous pshat. La'olam ba'al b'samoch kamiflagi. They're arguing about the term al that the Torah writes. Does al mean nearby, or does it not mean nearby? We asked the question that they already argued about this machlokes regarding the breads of the carbon taida. Why do they have to argue here again regarding the isser of chametz while you shech the carbon? But tzricha, and we have to have it said both times. They argued about this twice. If they would argue regarding chametz, havamin, I would say as follows. Bahu, in that case, who the Kamer Rabbi Yechanan, the loy bin al b'samach. There Rabbi Yechanan says that al means that you're over if you have chametz, even if it's not nearby. Why? Bishum de isser hu. There's an isser of possessing chametz. Wherever you have it in your possession, you have it in your possession. So therefore you're going to be over. Doesn't have to be nearby. When it comes to sanctifying the breads, that the breads should get the kedusha of the carbon, here there's more of a svara that it has to be nearby. Loi kaddish elo bifnim. So I would say that it's that le'inyan mikta again. Aval le'inyan mikta shlechem loy kaddish ela b'fnim, that it only becomes kaddish inside. Eimem moidel Reb Shimon ben Lakish to be inon al b'samuch, that it has to be nearby. Why is that? The ise gavoy kaddish. Only if it's on the inside, then it could get the kedusha. V'iloi loy kaddish, and if it's not inside, it does not get the kedusha. Here, there's a svara that it should dafka have to be inside the azara, it has to be nearby. Why is that? Medida have a kli sharis, just like it is with a kli sharis. What's the halach of a kli sharis? So Rashi says by a kli sharis, if you place something into a keli from the base of mikdash, a kli sharis, it makes it kadosh. But that's only if it enters inside the kli sharis. So the same thing also, I see from this, to bring the effect of the kedusha on something, it has to be inside. Over here, there's more of a svara that it actually has to be inside the azara. That's Rashi's pshat. Taisva says by kli sharis, when you makdir something in a kli sharis, has to be inside the azara. It can't just be anywhere. So I see this idea that when it comes to being makdish something, there's more of a svara that has to be dafke inside. Mashenkin by an isser, the isser is not necessarily inside. Wherever you have it, the isser takes effect. So therefore, tzricha, he has to tell me that no, the same halacha applies by both of them. And the same thing is also in the reverse. V'yashmina linyan. That they have the same achloikis. The same achloikis beneged to the lav of l'sishchat al chametz. They have the same achloikis, like the case of the al zevach toid of Shlomov. Tzricha, yeah. We're holding v'yashminon, and the reverse is the same thing. V'yashminon li'im mikdash lechem. If the halacha they would only be arguing regarding how the breads get sanctified, if it has to be nearby or not. Havamin, I would say, b'hach kamed Rav Shimon ben Lakish bin an al b'samach. Only over there does it have to be nearby. The isek avoy kaddish, only if it's inside the azara does it become holy, and iloi loy kaddish, and if not, it doesn't. Aval in chametz. And by chametz, I would say that he agrees to Rabbi Yechanan. The loy bein an al b'samach, it does not have to be nearby. The isurahu, because the having chametz is an isur. V'chalecha the isur, wherever you possess it, you have it, and therefore I would think that the isur should take effect wherever it is, and that's what Rav Shimon ben Lakish had to be mechadish, that even by this isur, you only over if it's nearby in the azara. Tzricha, that's why I have to have both of these machlokesen. Baye minei Rav Ashi Rav Ami. Rav Ashi asked Rav Ami the question. Ein loy l'shoichet. So we discussed this before. Exactly who's the one that has the chametz to be over on this iser. So before we said that it's the shaychit, it's the zaydik, it's one of the people of the group. But Rabbi Shia asked us as a question: if the shaychit does not have the chametz, but v'yesh lo le'echad b'bnei chabura, someone from the group does have chametz. Mahu, what's going to be the din? Who's going to be? Are you going to be over the iser? By the way, regarding who's going to be over the iser, that's a machlokes. I just slipped. But to if one of the Bnei Chabura has the chametz, and there's the sheikhet that's shechting the carbon, who's over the isser? There's a machlokes. Some say that it's only the sheikhet. So if he knows that one of the Bnei Chabura has chametz, he's going to be over the isser. Others say that that person of the Chabura that has the chametz, he's going to be over the isser. But that's not his question. His question over here is, if one of the Bnei Chabura has the chametz, will you say that the sheikhet or whoever it is over the isser or not? Amalei, so he answered him, Miksiv le'sishchat al chemtzecha. Does it say do not shech the carbon on your chametz? You're not only over if it's your chametz. Even if one of the people of the group has the chametz, you're going to be over. So therefore, he says you are over. Le'sishchat al chametz ksiv. It just says don't shecht on chametz. Amalei. So Rav Ashi said to Rav Ami, so ihachi, if so, afil lechat b'seif ha'olam, even someone that's not part of the group. If there's someone in the other end of the world that has chametz and it's the time of the Korban Pesach, you're going to be over because there's chametz? Can't say that. Amalei. So he said to him, no. Amakra, the Torah says, lo sishchat v'lo yolin. In the same pasuk where it talks about the isser of not shechting it on chametz, it also says lo yolin, that you're not allowed to keep the Korban Pesach till the next morning after the time that you're allowed to eat it. So I compare the two. Lo sishchat al chametz. Hanach the kaimi alei mishum lo yolin. Who has the isser of lo sishchat al chametz? It only refers to if someone that has this isser of not leaving over the meat of the Korban Pesach till the next day, then you're going to be over on lo sishchat. But stam someone else, anybody that's not part of the group that has this chametz, you're not going to be over. It's only someone that's part of this group that has the lav of lo yolin. So then the isser of lo sishchat al chametz applies as well. So now, based on this, Amarav Papa Hilkach, therefore, Kayin Hamakter Sachelev. So before we were talking about the Sheikhet and we're talking about the Zaydik, but now it says even the Kayin that is Makter the Chelev, he brings the fats of the parts of the Korban Pesach on the Mizbeach, oive b'loisese. If he has chametz, he's going to be over on the loisese. Or if someone in the group has chametz, he's going to be over on the loisese as well. Not only the shechita, but the haktara as well. Hoyel v'yeshnoi b'chlal halones emurin. The lav of lo yolin applies to the kohen that's bringing it on the Mizbeach. You're not allowed to leave it overnight to the next morning. So just like that lav applies to him, the lav of leisishchat, not to do this haveda while there's chametz, is also going to apply. Tanya Kava said that Rav Papa, we can learn clearly in a Braisa that it says, like Rav Papa, that even the person that's makter will also have this lav. HaSheichet es HaPesach al chametz oive b'loisese. Eimesai, when is this? If he has chametz, bizman shehu l'sheichet, the sheichet has the chametz, or l'zeirik, the zeirik has the chametz, or l'echad mibnei chabura, someone from the group has chametz. Hoya l'echad b'seif ha'olam, someone else, not part of the group, someone on the other side of the world has chametz, ein zakek lei, doesn't matter. Ve'echad ha'sheichet, ve'echad ha'zeirik, ve'echad ha'makter, chayev. Whether you're doing the shchita, the zrike, or the haktara, you're going to be chayev, just like Rav Papa said. Aval hamoilik es ha'oif ba'arba asa ein oiv b'loi klum. Melike, if there was a case that you were bringing a bird and you were doing melike, when would you have to bring a bird on Erev Pesach and do melike for this? So Rashi says the common case would be something we had before, which is a mechusa kippurim, a person that still had to bring a carbon to allow him to eat kachim. So one of the most common karbonis that's brought from mechusa kippurim, which is a yeldis or a zav or a mitzayre, is a bird. And over there, the avodah that's done is malike. So even if you're going to say that the lav of leisishchat applies not only to Korban Pesach, but it applies to other karbonis as well, but that's not by malike. You're not going to be over b'loi klum. That's what it says in this Braisa, so you clearly see, like what Rav Papa said. Okay, the Gemara asks a stira over here on this opinion of Rav Papa from this Braisa, what it says in a different Braisa. Okay, I think we should just finish off the Indian and see the stira over here. Like the Gemara veramini, but it says in another Braisa, Hasheichet es HaPesach chala chametz oive b'loisese, you shecht it while you have chametz, you over on a lav. Rabbi Yehuda says, like we learned in the Mishnah, Afat Tomid. Even for the Korban Tomid, you also over on a lav. Amru Loi, the Tanakama said, the Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, and they said to him, Loi Amru Ela bePesach Bulvad. This is only a problem with the Korban Pesach. Eimesai bizman, and then he explains, when are you over on this lav? Bizman sheyesh l'shaychit, oy l'zayrik, oy l'echad b'bnei chabura. Only if one of these three individuals has the chametz. Hay l'echad b'seif ha'olam, someone in the end of the world has chametz, ein zakak, doesn't matter. Then the Braisa adds, ve'echad ha'shaychit, ve'echad ha'zayrik, ve'echad ha'maylik. It includes even if you're doing malika for a bird, and ve'echad ha'mazeh, and then you're sprinkling the blood of the bird on the mizbeach, chayiv, you're going to be chayiv. Then the Braisa concludes, Avala kaimitz as hamincha ein oiv b'loisese. For kimitze, you're not, if you do kimitze while you have chametz, you're not oiv on a loisese. Hamakter es ha'emurin, if you do the haktare, ein oiv b'loisese, you're also not oiv on a loisese. So this Braisa says differently. So we have over here a contradiction. Says the Gemara, kashye melike amalike. We have a contradiction regarding malike. In the first Braisa it says that regarding malike there's no lav of leisishchat al chametz. In the second Braisa it says there is. And kashya aktara aktara. In the first Braisa it says that there is a law for haktara, and the second Braisa it says that there isn't. So we have a stira for both of these things. So before the Gemara answers this question, the Gemara says, this Braisa itself doesn't make sense. There's a contradiction here. According to you, you're asking me a question from this Braisa. What did it say in this Braisa? Tikshilachi gufa. Look at the words of the Braisa. There's a contradiction here. Diktani, in the beginning, the Braisa says, Lo amru ella bePesach bulvad. The Chacham were telling Rabbi Yehuda, this lav only applies to the Korban Pesach. And V'haditani, and right afterwards the Braisa says, Echad HaSheichet, Echad HaZayrik, V'echad HaMaylik, and it includes Malika as well. Malika is not in the Korban Pesach, that's by a bird. And V'echad HaMazeh, the sprinkling of the blood of the bird as well. So what's going on? There's a contradiction here in the Braisa. So Ella, the answer is, Ha V'ha Rab Shimon. Both Braisas that we quoted here is Rab Shimon that we had in the Mishnah. What was the point that Rab Shimon was machadish in the Mishnah? That this lav of not shechting on chametz is not only on Erev Pesach, it's also on Yontiv Pesach itself. And therefore we could say as follows. Melike amalike lekashya. The contradiction regarding Melike is not a question. Kan barba asar. On Erev Pesach itself, there is no Isser for the Melike, as Rab Shimon holds, on Erev Pesach, the Isser is only for the Korban Pesach and not for anything else, and therefore not for the bird, the Melike. And Kam B'chol Shamayit. And the other Braise, the second Braise, is talking about on Yontif Pesach itself, and over there, Rab Shimon holds that the Isser applies to other Karbanis and to the bird as well. V'idi v'idi Rab Shimoni. Both Braises go according to Rab Shimon. That's the answer of the contradiction. It depends if it's Erev Pesach or on Pesach. Haktare, ahaktare, nami lekashya. The contradiction of haktare is also not a question. It's basically a machlekes. Tanoi, this is a machlekes tanoim. The ikke, the makish haktare l'shchite. The first braise compares haktare to shchite, that both of them can't be done while you have chametz. The ikke man, the loy makish. And the second braise holds, we don't compare them, and therefore, for haktare, even while you have chametz, you're not going to be over.